Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Jan Snoepien, and with me there's Joy Hearn. Joy, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, I'm doing all right.
Well,
How are you doing?
wonderful. Good, thank you. In October, Joy showed a lovely demo of our new open space accessible web application, allowing us to coordinate our open spaces. And that was a very interesting demonstration of what the app can do. And now we want to take a look at how does it achieve all those things. We'll start from the most user-facing part. We'll talk about the front end of that application. And well, time permitting, we'll try to go step by step through the front end, and then either in this episode or in a following one, go into the backend side of things. We really hope for your help here. So we'd love to have your questions in the YouTube chat, or if for any reason you don't have an account, you can tweet them at me, which should also reach me. I have the window open, so I will relay those questions to Joy, who is the author of the entire application and is the right person to answer all your doubts about how the thing is built and how it works.
Yeah.
Is there anything I forgot as an opening?
I don't think so. I think we just wanted to kind of look at we both like this application. It's kind of fun. And so we wanted to just talk about how we built it, like on the technical side. I did discuss the accessible aspect of it in the last INNOQ tech lunch that I did for our INNOQ Accessibility Day. I don't know if we can maybe link to that at some point if someone's interested in reading that, but or reading it, watching it. But what we wanted to do today is just talk about the architecture of our app. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think we can go straight to your screen, so that we can take a look at all the code and the app itself. So yeah, last time in the show in October, you mentioned that the entire thing is written in Clojure, at least the backend side of things. So my understanding would be that the front end is probably also Clojure script that gets compiled down to JavaScript, but guessing from what I see on your screen, that's not right, is it?
No, it's not. Yeah, this my Emacs is being a little finicky. My MacBook, my Intel MacBook is currently having a little difficulty, so I hope this live stream works out okay. It is true when you talk about doing Clojure applications, often you think, okay, Clojure, there's also the Clojure script variety. There's also Clojure script, which is a variant of Clojure, and you think, okay, the front end is probably written in Clojure script as well, but in this case, it is not. And the reason is that the reason is one, I really like HTML, so the application actually works completely without JavaScript in any form at all. I can actually show that if I turn off the JavaScript in my browser. If I submit, so the whole architecture of this application is that when I do any action in the UI, it submits a post request to the server. The server then responds with basically a redirect to this main page. So if I submit this session, then it does a round trip to the server. It posts that request to the server, and then the session comes back and it sends a redirect to this page, and this whole page is then re-rendered by the server after every post request. So if we look down here, right now it's kind of in a squished view, so the UI is shown over each other, not next to each other. But then here my little my little session is in the queue down here, and that worked completely without JavaScript. So if I want to position a session in the slot, I can also just choose a slot that's also a post request, and then it does the same thing. It does a post request to the server, and then there's a redirect to this resource. And then when this resource is called by the server, then it will refresh the whole page. So that's the idea. That's the architecture that I did it. And the idea behind that was that, yeah, that's just how I build web applications. I considered writing the progressively enhanced part in ClojureScript, but I did not. And the reason for that is that uh, ClojureScript doesn't currently have good support for custom elements that I've been able to see. If I'm incorrect with that, I would absolutely love it if someone would tell me that I'm wrong. I think that there's that it would be I would love it if there were great support for custom elements in ClojureScript, but I wasn't able to find one on the fly, and I didn't want to write my own library for it at that particular moment in time. So that doesn't mean
And those custom
it's.
elements.
Hmm? What were you going to
Go
say?
ahead.
I was saying
I
it
was
doesn't
asking
mean I
about the
think it's
custom
actually.
elements, whether those custom elements are what we're seeing on the screen right now.
Yes. So these are custom elements. So there are custom elements on the screen. I currently have turned them off because I turned off JavaScript. So the custom elements are still there, but the JavaScript behavior for the custom elements are not registered when JavaScript is
Okay.
disabled. But if I reload the page, then the JavaScript custom elements will be activated. It won't really do anything right now because there's no it's not doing anything right now. I mean, the UI. I don't have another. If in a normal circumstances, what the custom elements do is they kind of listen to changes that happen to the application, and then they will blend them into the UI. So this is with me locally on my computer, so it's not that exciting. But if somebody on another computer, like if it was actually in the internet, were to submit a session, position a session in the slots, then this whole UI like updates itself whenever these updates arrive.
I
Yeah.
see. And we could simulate that by you opening another browser window.
Yes, I can do that
If the CPU will allow that.
if the CPU allows. Exactly. Yeah. What I can try to do is open the try to open the same tab. That is the wrong URL. Me for that. That is the URL for the chat, which we are watching. So if you are interested in asking questions, that is still an option that's open.
Go ahead. There are no bad questions, especially since
there
we
are
might
no
be showing
bad
stuff
questions.
that's new to you. So go ahead. We're happy to answer any of them.
Yeah. So we can see here that I just opened this. So we can see the kind of the live behavior in action. If I click on move session in this window and I successfully move it over, time lag allowing, then it will appear. It should appear in this UI.
That's that event source I see in the background in your Emacs.
That is the source. That is the source code of one of the custom elements on the page.
Okay, we'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
So hopefully
choosing the slot back in the CPU for some time, and then probably we will have some sort of behind the scenes communication that will cause that session to move, or we won't.
Yep, and so it did not. So there's probably a bug.
Okay, there's something to fix.
Yes, there
but
is.
before we get to fixing bugs, I bet I just did something backend and you just didn't get an event I should have sent you. But okay, cool. So we have those custom elements that the entire front end is composed out of, and Does it mean that you decided not to employ any of the big traditional single page frameworks? You just went with pure web components?
I did. And I laughed. Okay, it's a very bad joke, but I laugh and say this is the first single page app I've ever built because it's one page and it's an app, so it's technically a single page app. Um,
Yeah,
but
it
as I
counts.
said, that's kind of a bad joke. So when I had the idea for this app, I thought to myself, "Oh, this is finally." So many of the applications that I write are just your basic CRUD application where you really don't have that much, uh, uh, you know, um, you really don't have that much uh, updates in the UI. And so I've never really had the need to have a lot of JavaScript in my user interface. Um,
Hmm?
and when I got the idea for this app, I was like, okay, all of these different parts on this page, they need to update themselves pretty regularly. That's what I want. I want the behavior of the application to update itself pretty regularly. Um, and so I built that. I decided to build it, and then I was like, okay, this is what single page frameworks are made for. They're made for this kind of interactive um, user interface that updates itself and all these things. So I was thinking, oh, this could be the chance to actually employ a single page framework. Maybe this is a good fit for it. And then uh, what I realized is that I don't actually have any experience with page frameworks. And so I decided, okay, I'm just going to build it the way I know how to build it with custom elements and templates, HTML templates, and things like that. So I know those things. I know these technologies. And so I decided, oh, yeah, I'll just do that and see how far I come. So I just built it, and it ended up just being 15 kilobytes of JavaScript. So it's not actually that
15
much.
kilobytes of JavaScript. Very
Yeah,
nice.
15 kilobytes of JavaScript. I think it's 5 kilobytes of CSS. If you look at the sources, the size of the sources. Yeah, it doesn't want to look at that, but
But
yeah.
fantastic. Okay, templating is another interesting topic. That's something we will return to. Stream.
Yeah, we will.
Um,
Um, yeah, I think I'm gonna close this right now because it's being too slow.
yeah, we don't have time for that. Um, okay, cool. So now I understand what led you to this approach without any framework. Um, so now we can talk about that event that we clearly missed 5 minutes ago. How does those events get communicated between the backend and the front end? Because I would guess that this is probably something like WebSockets, or did we choose some other technology?
Mm. So the technology we actually chose is server sent events. So what I can do is I can show you by what a server sent event is it's basically a one-way direct. It's a one-way connection to a server. So if I do and I can make a curl request to this endpoint, the server sent event endpoint. And that's also what this custom element behind in this Emacs window that I currently have open. That's currently what this does. So this is a job. It's a web standard server sent events. So all modern JavaScript, all modern browsers have this API, which is the event source API. And I can just write new event source with an URL. Um, and then I can add an on message listener to my event source and basically react to any messages that come over this server sent event stream. So that's exactly what I did here. So this is the exact stream. If I submit a new session, um,
Background, we see those keep alive packets to make sure that any proxy in between doesn't
yeah,
close the connection, right? Oh, there it came. Super.
yeah. So here we see this is exactly the data. So when JavaScript is activated, what the UI does is it sends this post request. It still sends it to the server, and the same exact thing happens on the server. The server just executes the post request, executes what I want to do, and then sends a redirect back to the browser, and then what the JavaScript does is it ignores the response from the uh, post request, and then it just listens to this data stream which is going on in the background. And this data stream, so basically, this is what a server sent event stream looks like. It's the server. It's an open connection to the server, so the server can just keep pulling some data into this stream. So when something new happened, then this data object was written on the stream, and the UI is listening to exactly the same stream, which is why it says I'm currently next in line, and that I should select a slot for my session. And
Can you make
then
it a
it's
bit
also
larger,
down here. It
just in
should be down
case
here in the
somebody's
queue.
watching on a small screen? I mean,
Yeah.
the terminal window.
That in the terminal window, yes.
So we can take a look at how this piece of data looks like. Okay, cool. So then this event populates that custom event object in JavaScript, and then both changes the UI as you shown there. You're currently next in line, and on top of that, all of this is then readable for screen readers, right?
Yes. So yeah. Well, I mean, the updates themselves are not available for the screen reader, but the HTML. So in the HTML that I wrote, like I have a HTML. I determined a contract how the session object should look for each session in my user interface. So I have an HTML contract for that object, how it should look, and so that's exactly what this this UI, both the backend and the front end, uses exactly the same template in order to create these sessions, um, and I, because it's the same HTML, then what did I say? So that ensures that the accessibility is there. If you're talking about HTML, you're talking about if you're talking about accessibility, usually you're talking about what is it exactly on the in the HTML that makes it accessible. I'm going to try again to open my developer console, and then I can maybe show that where the template is in the HTML, the application.
Yeah, let's take a look, because we mentioned template already.
Yeah,
Now this will
so
be a nice segue to templating.
yes, exactly. Get it open? It will. So this uses a in the HTML of the page that I render. This has a template tag, which is the HTML templating. And in this template, you can it's basically the template tag is basically a snippet of HTML that is meant to be used as a template. And so this has exactly the same details that like exactly the same structure as what the backend renders. So the backend actually puts this template in the it puts this snippet of HTML, which is the structure that we want to use for our sessions, inside of the HTML template. So that is then available for all of the custom elements to use to create their own sessions in the UI. Yeah. Stefan asked a question in the chat, which is, did I find it making it accessible hurt or increase the usability? I think it helps. I think it really helps. Like whenever you focus on accessibility, you're focusing on like use cases that specific users need, and so when you just take those into account and say they're really important, and then develop for them, and then when you implement things that are accessible for users, you almost always make it better for other users. Okay.
Very interesting. Okay, we've got the templating. So the entire thing, all the HTML is built. The dynamic part is built from such templates that you populate from JavaScript, right?
The dynamic part, yeah. So that's
The dynamic part.
I could look I can look at my that specific component is the waiting queue component. So you kind of can choose names that are useful or are what do you call it? You can choose names for the elements which are I have a German word in my head that's not an English word and wouldn't be helpful here. I want to say sprechend. I want to say that they're
They
don't know what I can't
communicate?
think of the English word for sprechend right now. What is it?
Communicate?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, so like the names of the elements. If we look in here, there's actually this waiting queue element is actually the name of the element, the HTML. And with JavaScript, what you can do with custom elements, basically, you create your custom element, the name of the class that I define the custom element in, which extends its waiting queue extends HTML element, and then I can define a connected callback function, which is where I can define all of the JavaScript that I want to be called. So as soon as this waiting queue element appears in the DOM and has been registered by the browser, then this connected callback function will be called. So here I can add event listeners for all of the domain events. That the domain events are the same ones as we use in the backend. But we have these domain facts that's what we're sending over our server side event stream. If we look here, there's a Spacy domain fact, and that's the session suggested. It has the session suggested name. So with this fact handler, that's what I showed before. The fact handler basically translates these things that get sent over the wire into JavaScript events that we can then listen to in our JavaScript, and then I can do things. So in the add queued session function method of my class, I can then extract what I want from the event um, and create the session. And the create session basically uses this template, which we saw here under the hood, in order to create the actual HTML blob that is then appended to the list element in this case. And the reason why, just maybe on the side note, the reason why the ClojureScript integration is not so trivial is that I am not aware of how to use like classes, JavaScript classes, so well in ClojureScript. There are ways I think you can do it because a class is it's basically syntactic sugar for some kind of object. I don't know exactly how they define it, like object prototyped. Um, uh, but the ClojureScript by default doesn't support classes out of the box. At least it did not at the time when I was writing this. If that has changed, please let me know. Yeah.
I think we need native support for JavaScript classes in ClojureScript.
Or some kind of way, like some kind of functional
word.
interfaces. Yeah. I think it would also be good if we had some kind of way of defining in a ClojureScripty way something that would then be compiled down to a class. In a similar way that in Clojure we have records which are compiled under the hood to something like a Java class, to have that kind of concept where I can define a connected callback function and define, okay, I want this functionality to be connected to an event with this name, and then to have kind of a ClojureScript library which would translate that under the hood and compile that down into a custom element. I think that would be really cool.
That would be fantastic. Knowing ClojureScript community such a thing probably exists and we don't know about it. So let us know in the comments if you know.
Please.
If just send us a link, we'd love it. And one thing which I find interesting is words that we're using, because like we call something that happened in the domain a fact, while many people would refer to it as an event. Then we have sessions, and those sessions aren't your backend session, HTTP session, but rather it's what our day is composed of, those individual blocks of time when people talk about stuff. So why did we decide to do that? And did it lead to confusion when we were picking those names?
Yeah, well, I can show closure for the first time. We said we were going to
Fantastic.
show everyone closure, and we've shown only JavaScript and HTML up to now. But we can change that now.
We're easing everybody
So
out.
So this is basically the core of our application, which is the domain. It's our Spacying domain namespace enclosure, and here we define our domain. So here we have this is closure spec. We're defining basically a specification of the data objects that we want to use in our user interface. And so I think the reason why we decided that is so the name we used, we actually took them from our domain. So the domain that we're trying to work with here is we're trying to work with the open space domain. So in the open space domain, when you're talking about a domain-driven design, we talk about use the names of things that you actually use in the domain in your code. And so in an open space, the domain, you actually talk about sessions. So I say, I suggest a session, and this is what I'm going to, like, it's basically you write it on a Post-it note and you stick it on the board. And so when we were designing our domain, session is also the name we used for basically this thing, this yellow, in here, in this case, it's a yellow sticky note kind of looking thing. And that's the terminology for it in the domain that we're building. And the other thing we use in our domain is we use the name event, which is basically this whole page that we see here. So I'm gonna make this a little smaller so I can scroll up. So if we scroll up to the top, we see here this is the event, the 2021 February event that we have, because in INNOQ we use the terminology event to describe this getting together of everyone multiple times a year. So that's our
Essentially what
domain.
everybody else calls a retreat.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. But yeah. So in our domain language for our little app, we use these terminologies that we use anyway when we're talking about our open space events. And for that reason, because event was already used for this, we I'm scrolling too fast. We have, like, we defined a facts, which we use within our user interface. And so that we called these things that we would otherwise probably have called events, we called them facts, because they are things that have occurred. So they are a fact at the point of time that they're set for the wire. It's something that we've already changed in our backend, and so it has already occurred. And so instead of calling it an event, call it a fact in that instance. Yeah.
Yeah, this was very interesting brain exercise to let the domain language drive this namespace you see here, so specifying names of things and not letting technical nouns and verbs affect our thinking, so that our event is like that they composed out of sessions and not something that you'd associate with a domain event out of domain event.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Cool. And then what do we use those, since we're here already, what do we use those definitions for? Am I looking at something like the definition of types for type checking, or is it something else?
Maybe you can answer the question you just asked. I always have a bit of difficulty describing what spec is. That's why I was gonna boomerang it back to you. But the idea is basically it's not so the specs themselves are not um, they're not entwined directly in the functions. They're defined separately, but you can kind of they are descriptions. They're kind of like types in that sense, but you can combine them at a later time to do validation and different things.
Yeah, I've nothing to add. This is really really useful to describe this with your expectation about how such a piece of data should look like. And it's cool that you also have this flexibility of being able to express those things as predicates. So it can be just a function returning true or false depending on the piece of data, so that you can perform your, well, it's not type checking anymore, but perform this validation using the entire power of the language. And then we, I guess, use it somewhere further down in this namespace whenever we
Oh,
make certain transformation to our open space event. We then verify that it's still a valid event from the perspective of our domain.
yeah. I
We
can
have
go
a
show
comment saying, I would say, sorry?
continue.
Alexander says that he would say that spec is a data constrained language, not a static type system. It's a very good way to put it. Thank you, Alexander.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's I think that's a very good way to put it as well. So this we can kind of see as well. This is kind of what we were talking about. So this is the actual behavior for our application. So when we suggest a session with this form here, we send that to the server. In the back end, this function is actually being called, and the function picks the current state of our event. I think. I think that's the event in that instance.
So
The
too,
current
yeah.
user and certain data attribute or data that is sent as well into the function. So in this case, it would be the title and the description that we want. And then basically, based on that, uh, we can generate what we need. We generate a new session ID and a fact ID. Um, create the new session that needs to be created, the data object, and then we send what comes out of this function, which we call command. Just internally, we call it a command. But then what is returned is the new event, a data object with a new event, and the new facts that have been generated from this function.
Cool. And those facts, as we can see, are contained as this new fact called session suggested, and it has the date on it. When was it created? Fantastic. And this does nothing. It has nothing to do with the storage, with the database, and it's nearly pure transformation of our domain objects, if you forgive, depending on the source of randomness for random UUID and depending on the time which could have been injected from outside to make sure that the whole thing is pure function, right?
Yeah, exactly. So then we can also define we
Fantastic.
define some helper functions. This is all it's all data transformation functions. So for instance, the the um, the actual data I can try to show that. I prepared in a different namespace. I prepared something I can execute um, in my thing. So see. So um, try to get one window. Sorry.
No
I was
worries.
going to
I'm
show.
looking whether we have any comments.
Yeah, should work. There we go. So basically, I wanted to just show so the whole application, all of the state that we have for our application, we store in a system map. And what we can do, and I don't know what that is, unmatching. Uh, no, this isn't a comment, so it's not too tragic, but I do not know why it didn't match my disease. Um, but so we have in our data, like we can retrieve our data object from our system, um, and then from that we can retrieve, for instance, all of the slugs, which is for events. So the slug is this URL thing that you would put here. So if I want to retrieve the data for a specific event, I can retrieve it like this, and I'm going to just do that. We have some live execution. There we go. So you can't really see everything there. I don't know, should I make it a little larger or is it okay?
I think
Um,
this shows the how it works in principle. So let me take a step back. So what are you doing right
okay.
now? You're executing some code, but where is it running? Is it running in the browser, or are you sending it? Where is it running?
So it's actually running, I have the application, I started the application with line REPL, and I started the application with I have a Go command in my user namespace, which basically starts the whole system and saves that in a basically a global variable, which have then access to. And what I did here is I connected my Emacs to this REPL, and so it's executing this code it live, and basically retrieving this data from the database this time. So I'm
Okay.
executing code on the fly in a REPL.
Nice. So let me to paraphrase it, like we have a running JVM with Spacy backend running in it, and then you are sending those pieces of code straight from your editor to execute in that JVM, and you see results back in your editor with this short feedback loop. Nice. We don't have to
And what I
restart
really
the
wanted
app
to
to execute the query. Very lovely.
yeah. So you can actually restart the whole app without restarting the JVM. That's what's nice about it. One of the things that's nice
Hmm.
about it. But here I can also introspect the actual running system, and retrieve all of the data, um, uh, just by executing a few commands in a REPL. Um, and so, but what I wanted to show here is that we very much designed our data model. The domain closure, the domain file, which we just showed, is very much based on, it's very much matches the UI. So we kind of did a UI driven data model in this instance. And so here we can see we have a domain waiting queue in here. We have domain rooms, which are the rooms that are which for the sessions, and the times, which are for the sessions. And then we have also a domain schedule event, which is just a collection of the sessions that have been scheduled. So you have kind of two different areas where um, the data lands either in the waiting queue or the schedule. And so when you're scheduling something, for instance, you can just literally move that object like from the waiting queue. You take it out of the waiting queue and then you place it in the schedule. Um, and so that's kind of the idea. So this data model under the hood is very much driven by the user interface, which we wanted to generate from it. Um, yeah, that was what I wanted to say about it. Um,
Hmm.
and what I also can show is, so I can maybe open this. So one thing we did in the back end, I showed how the templating works in the front end. But if I uh, open the resource, it's um, and there's
So
a
some
session.
snippets. So I guess we'll be looking at some backend side
Yeah, well,
HTML templating.
hmm? So this is one thing that I really like about Clojure. So if I'm going to make this larger so we can look at this a little bit more. So this is basically exactly the same structure. Exactly the same structure as what we looked before in this template that we rendered in the UI. And so this is just one snippet, but this is actually the template that we use for our um, our user interface. So this is our session template, and it's pure HTML because what is the best data structure for representing HTML? Is HTML. HTML is a data
It's hard to
language.
argue with
It
that,
is
yeah.
yeah. And so we wanted, when we were doing templating, we wanted really to use pure HTML as much as possible. So now I can switch back to the other thing. I think we have maybe 4 minutes just to wrap up. I want to show
Yeah, no
in
rush.
live, which is the templating engine that we used. So basically, this uses exactly that file that we just saw. So if I execute that, you can see what comes up. Okay, that is okay. And then I need to execute. I need that defined the snippet, which is basically a function. So no, no, I think it's a function. So I think I need to call it. We'll see.
Else? Yeah, most likely.
Call it as a function. We'll see what comes out. So basically this is in live, which is our templating engine. And this templating engine, it translates that HTML which we saw into closure data structures, which we can then work with. And the closure endpoints, when we return this, it translates that back into HTML, which is then shown in the UI. But what we can do with this is we can, like here, I just made a little example. So maybe I'll execute this again. We can see there are these data slot. So that's actual tags which are in the HTML. And what I want to do is I want to replace that slot, like this element. I want the content of the element. I want to set it to be a content that I set. And so here we can kind of see I can define some transformation functions, uh, which will then be applied to my template. So this is what in live looks like. So basically here, I would set this data slot. I look in my HTML for an attribute with the data slot being equal to title, and then I want to set the HTML content of that to be a parameter. And what I can also do here is I can generate content. So I just wanted to show that here. So I can use, for instance, a for element enclosure. And for each element that I specify, I can just set like that to be an LE element. So for instance, I could just show how that would work.
It combines this as if CSS selector style way of addressing where do you want to put or what do you want to transform, and then you pass in a transformation function that will run on on those elements it found to modify the template somehow.
Yeah, the syntax was a little bit. It took me a little while to get used to. But basically, like if you're not so familiar with Clojure, what you could also imagine is that if you're more familiar with, say, jQuery, what you can imagine is that here we're saying, okay, this is the template, and here in each of these blocks here, we're defining a jQuery selector, and then here what we're doing here is what should we do if we find the selector. So you kind of descriptively can say find this jQuery selector, and then do this. These functions here. So there's HTML content. There's also, you could set HTML attribute to be a certain value. So there's different transform. I don't know what the exact terminology is that InLive uses, but there's different functions that you can use. So here, set my title and just pass in some elements, and then
And you're using exactly the
we'll
same
get a
HTML
new
input
HTML
file,
snippet.
resulting in an empty list. We must have missed detail. Yeah, I think the selector is in singular while it should have been in plural. Above you see detail, and it should be details in the definition of details too. compile that and see what happens. I find it cool
And
that
then,
Joy is using exactly the same JVM she started at the beginning of the stream and shows us loading of data and their HTML transformations. There we go. Look at this HTML. Well, nearly HTML. We still need to translate the data structure back to HTML. But all those values are there.
yep. So, yeah.
Very cool.
That's pretty much all I prepared. I think in lives are really cool if you're doing Clojure. Do you want to generate HTML? And I think there's some really cool ideas that could be reused in other contexts as well from that.
Wonderful. Cool. It's 1 p.m. and as you're saying, you showed everything that you prepared for today. So I think we can begin to wrap it up. What we'd love to have from you is, you participants, let us know what you like, what you find lacking. And I think that we still have lots of content to share with you about Spacying, and we're happy to continue, maybe take a look at the entire loop from submitting a session, how the whole thing goes through the backend database and how it percolates back through the SSE stream. We're open. We're happy to show you all those details. In the meantime, you can find Spacy on GitHub. The whole thing is open source. I believe it's Apache license. And yeah, do we have anything to add to Spacy itself and today's stream?
I don't think so. If you're interested, yes, if you're interested in us doing a follow-up stream, please do let us know. We would enjoy it, and if anyone else would enjoy it as well, we'll probably do it. So just let us know.
Fantastic. Cool. Then we can start wrapping it up. This was Spacy, taking a look from the front-end side of things. Next time it might be back-end or something completely different. In the next stream, we're switching back to German, and a colleague of ours, Christoph Isalon, is going to talk about how to deal with input that you cannot trust. So that's input validation for you right there. And I believe that's it. I think we should move on to our well-deserved lunch, Joy. And thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see you next time.